I haven't touched Metro Exodus since playing through it last year, but the impression it left on me hasn't waned. While it did lose some of its trademark claustrophobia in its transition to the outside world, it did compensate with stunning visuals and as powerful an atmosphere, although touching upon different nuances. It was a slower-paced first-person shooter that could have easily bored anyone not willing to dance to its rhythm, yet those who did journeyed through memorable locations and found a slice of home in the interludes taking place on the Aurora. When recently picking up and starting its two DLCs, the Two Colonels and Sam's story, I did feel like I was heading in almost fresh, but getting reacquainted with how Metro Exodus played didn't take long. For the purpose of this video, I'll tackle each DLC in its own section, rounding things off at the end with how I felt about them as part of the Season Pass. It's worth keeping in mind that I got them for around €8 with the Epic Games Store Mega Sale discount, although I did my best to account for them without this detail. Thus, let's begin, although not without making it clear that spoilers follow.
Thank you all for your good work and wish you a Happy New Year.
The Two Colonels is the shorter and cheaper DLC, however, that doesn't mean one should underestimate what it has to offer. The title refers to Colonels Miller and Klebnikov, both names that should be familiar if you've beaten the main game. The DLC retraces the steps of Colonel Slava Klebnikov through different moments in the last year of the Novosibirsk station, interlacing them with occasional snippets of Miller exploring the same places during the main story. You only get to play as Klebnikov, the DLC being split almost evenly between combat sequences and more peaceful ones inside the station. Things start off slowly as Klebnikov, equipped with a flamethrower, sets off to clear the slime that's spreading throughout the tunnels, clogging piping and bringing some fairly deadly worms close to Novosibirsk. The first section is one of the slowest in Metro Exodus. Burning the slime is a methodical affair that requires you to wait until it's consumed before being able to safely proceed. Your flamethrower is cumbersome and, aside from reloading it, you also need to keep it pressurized. The worms themselves can kill you easily when encountered in a few quick-time events. Aside from those moments, however, they rarely pose any real danger, at least on normal difficulty, being a tad too sluggish and dealing little damage. This first section in the Two Colonels has the potential of putting people off, as it takes the requirement of slowing down to the game's pace to the extreme. If you don't let the physical toil of the act sink in, or are just looking for some flamethrower fun, you'll likely be disappointed. The end of the section sees the Colonel returning to the station and talking to one of his acquaintances higher up in the chain of command. It's here that the DLC brings up the nature of truth, a central theme in Arthium's pursuits in the base game, which it also ends up building upon it later. Although things in the station should, in theory, be in order, the encroaching slime alongside dwindling supplies of green stuff, an anti-radiation drug vital to the survival of the station's denizens, is pushing the governing structures to plan an evacuation that they're keeping secret from their people for reasons not quite honorable. The DLC then transitions to a portion of exploring the station and meeting Klebnikov's son, Kirill, another familiar face from the base game. These bits do build a bond between the two characters who talk to each other on a nonetheless affectionate private-to-colonel basis. After a jump in time, the evacuation is underway, people being forced to relinquish the green stuff they own for the theoretical good of all. Here, Klebnikov has a choice between taking all the excess supply that one of his acquaintances has stocked up for his sick daughter or calling off the search. I chose the latter and only got thanks from the guy later on, which was a heartwarming moment tied to a choice that didn't seem to have any gameplay repercussions. The soldiers confiscating green stuff and rounding up civilians also strains the relationship between Klebnikov and his son. He was raised to admire these very soldiers that are now seemingly turning against the people they should protect. In an effort to maintain his son's innocence, the colonel tells him that he'll find the men guilty of that and have them punished, although he clearly can't, while also assuring Kirill that they're taking the green stuff from the rich folk who have plenty to give to the poor. This is, as Klebnikov himself knows, far from the ugly reality that makes up life, especially when in such dire straits.
And you can tell your superiors that.
Shortly after, Klebnikov faces rioters that didn't take the news of the evacuation, which would theoretically happen in 2 waves, all that well. This bit involves gunfights against regular human opponents and, at least on normal difficulty, failed to provide a sense of battling large waves of desperate enemies. Only one of 2 defensive explosive charges meant to fend off the attackers works, which sees the defending forces retreating. After barely escaping, Klebnikov learns the horrible truth. Everyone but the leadership of the station were to be sacrificed to the gas during the evacuation. I didn't speak about it earlier, but Klebnikov and the general, Tolia, can share private discussions at a few points during the campaign, since they're fairly close and both single fathers. Tolia promises Klebnikov and his son a spot on the first train out, only to later reveal that this was always a lie. The pawns have been dealt with, the general tells command just before learning that he's also been left behind and commits suicide. It's here where Klebnikov's view on truth changes, telling his son that it's never for us to decide, after previously saying that the government knows what's best for individuals because it doesn't think selfishly. He also tells Kirill that being lied to is never for his own good. After another jump in time, we see Klebnikov searching for the maps that Miller descends into the bunkers below Novosibirsk to obtain. His flamethrower is back, although now he faces mutants familiar from the main campaign. This section, although retaining the slow pace of the first one, is much more tense thanks to the slow technology of the bunker that puts Klebnikov in horde mode style situations that for the context work well. The blind ones also make a return, as terrifying as ever. After a desperate standoff against mutants and the blind one, the colonel is left without his flamethrower. Stubbornly, he secures the maps and, just as he gets past the pack of blind ones and tries to apply a dose of green stuff to stave off radiation poisoning, a near-dead monster grabs him, only to let him go once the colonel manages to close the massive door on the creature's arm. His only remaining dose of green stuff, however, ends up shattered on the floor, leaving him to die while gripping the maps vital to Miller and those on the Aurora.
Kirill, I'm coming back. I just need a tiny bit of rest. I'm just so tired.
The Two Colonels DLC ends with Miller talking to a deceased Klebnikov, explaining how frustrating Artyom's search for truth was in the beginning and how it since gave his life a real purpose. The lives of both men, adamant about doing their duty initially, are changed with discovering the truth, which forms an impromptu yet tangible bond between them, despite one of them being long gone at the time of their first meeting. Miller takes the maps and leaves, but not before thanking Klebnikov and promising that Kirill will receive his watch, which he previously had fixed for his dad, and escape Novosibirsk. The Two Colonels had its gripping moments, but I could easily see its slow intro and short length making it too much of a hassle for some. It's not particularly varied, but I personally enjoyed it even in its slowest moments, since they captured the gruesome efforts of people just doing their jobs, trying to keep outside corruption away while that inherent in the system debars them from the inside. The Two Colonels isn't a vital piece of DLC, but it's one that slots nicely next to the base game, ultimately having some worthwhile things to say.
Well, it's time. Farewell, Colonel Klebnikov. Rest easy.
Parting with my friends. It's hard.
Sam's story lies at the other end of the spectrum. Not only does it start after the conclusion of Metro Exodus' story, it's also larger than Two Colonels, taking players across one open map set in Vladivostok as they trace Sam's attempt to return home to his father. The entire adventure takes around 8 hours to finish. After departing Artyom and company's new home near Lake Baikal, Sam reaches Vladivostok, where he first encounters a captain beset by bandits. Upon helping him, the captain reveals the existence of a submarine, which could very well be Sam's ticket home. The meeting gets derailed when the Batwing, a variation of the bat-like demon from the main campaign and not Batman's African counterpart, assaults them. After a showdown with it, Sam gets carried away from the captain, losing his gear in the process. A run-in with a different set of locals ends with him captured, but not before holding his own in a brawl against multiple foes. He's then taken to the base of one Tom, a charismatic American with a sizable personal army led by Klim, a local with a no-nonsense attitude. As Sam gets shelter from the dangerous storm brewing outside, he learns that Tom owns the submarine in what is later revealed to be the captain's former settlement. The sub used to be the captain's too. Talking to Tom leads to finding out that he was an arms trader prior to the war, which not only made him more prone to survive, but alongside his bodyguard, Klim's men, gave him leverage over others. He offers to use a submarine to take Sam to San Diego, but not before explaining how it could also be used as a show of power, to build a would-be state and lead people into the future. The process, however, involves a captain whom they offered to help in the past but didn't see eye to eye with Tom due to his ambitions. They need the captain to help them with refueling the sub's generator, Tom offering to let the captain regain his settlement in exchange for his help. Sam agrees, but if you stick around after leaving, you'll hear Tom and Klim fighting over trusting Sam, who refuses Klim's offer for extra muscle, and learn that Klim's men messed up an abduction attempt of the captain and those loyal to him.
Deal?
Deal.
The captain later tells you that during the war he never had to use the sub's nukes and he'd rather things stay the same way. He brings up the fact that Tom is primarily a businessman, revealing that he doesn't trust him with such power, believing that behind his lofty goals of being the builder of a new world hide less honorable ideals that are closer to piracy. As you uncover what went on between Tom and the captain, you should, in theory, grow to mistrust Tom, a character who clearly plans on using you to get what he needs. This, however, doesn't really manage to erode the determination behind Sam's goals. He wants to go back home to see his father, tired of all the world saving he's done in the past. The captain grants you a detonator, which lets you choose whether or not you allow Tom his submarine when the time comes. I couldn't help but feel that Sam, despite taking part in their conflict, remained a detached observer with his goals unchanged. Simply put, the DLC doesn't quite do a good job of raising its central moral choice to the level of importance it wants to assign it. Sam's story has two endings, both of which in my view are weak. If you choose the supposedly higher moral ground, Sam ends up stuck in Vladivostok, patting himself on the back for keeping Tom from potentially using nukes to force others under his control, and assuring himself that he'll somehow reach San Francisco. This ending feels terribly unfulfilling, especially after Klim betrays him right before the DLC's end, taking the majority of Tom's men with him. Although Tom isn't to be trusted, the game doesn't quite manage to build him up as a potential threat, especially following this blow. The other ending, in which Sam does not destroy the sub, sees him reaching San Francisco after justifying his choice by saying that a few more scars, from Tom's nukes, on the body of the world's corpse don't matter, as he looks at the Golden Gate Bridge standing against the sunny horizon. The issue here is that you never quite learn if Sam actually gets to see his father, making all his efforts of returning home feel partly in vain. Both endings use the city's bridges as symbols to cement Sam's journey and actions into the world, but do so in a rather ineffective way. Sam never outgrows his status as a weary stranger hell-bent on getting home, which makes the core conflict of the DLC feel rather tone-deaf, hurting it quite significantly. But if story-wise the DLC has its missteps, perhaps it wins you over through its gameplay. Not really, no. Although it largely treads a familiar path, making use of many elements from the main game, Sam's story feels about as slow as the base game but much drier. Its scripted sequences, when Sam struggles to battle Klim or the mutant Batwing, lack the necessary oomph and are awkward to watch. Broadly speaking, you'll navigate Vladivostok on foot and via boat, following a path that's surprisingly linear as you look for the submarine's fuel rods. The new weapon that Sam receives early on can be customized with different parts, but the incendiary ammo is arguably the best thing about Sam's story. Landing headshots on opponents may be cathartic, but with incendiary ammo, a single bullet sets most enemies alight regardless of where you hit them. Their horrified screams, as their life is extinguished by the blaze that overtakes them, are powerful and make kills feel despicably satisfying. I loved using it all throughout and always prioritized crafting it over any other ammo types. Vladivostok's swamps and dilapidated buildings had an oppressive atmosphere to them, which was slightly amplified by its dangerous storms, the 2 or 3 odd times they appeared. Sadly, they're far from the powerful presence of Stalker's storms, which often engulfed your entire surroundings, making you feel small and insignificant if one caught you far away from home. Portions of Vladivostok have landmines littered across them, which require you to make use of your universal detector. Instead of instilling a sense of danger, mines were overly annoying as they one-shot Sam. Thankfully, destroying them didn't seem to consume any ammo, which was a boon, given how on a few occasions I did find myself strapped for bullets and air filters, even if not for very long. Sam's story also introduces what I think is a new enemy type, although I might be wrong. An electrically charged spider that kills all the light around it. Incendiary ammo works wonders against them too, but for the short time I had to face them, they were quite a fearsome, if a bit clunky foe. To give credit where credit is due, the DLC featured one of the most powerful sights in the entirety of the series. You learn early on that Vladivostok has bandits that capture fugglies, mutants that swarm foes but individually are quite easy to deal with, to sell them for labor. At one point, Sam reaches a bandit base, having the option of traversing a body of water by using cages with live fugglies inside as a makeshift bridge. It was unexpected to find myself feeling sorry for the same type of creature I had previously dispatched without thinking twice upon seeing it trapped and suffering. Another favorite moment, albeit one that's much lighter, involved a side quest focused on two slightly deranged brothers at odds over which one owns their car selling company. Never mind the nukes that blasted it to smithereens, following this simple side quest to its end yielded a satisfying conclusion that I honestly didn't expect. All these positives, however, come into conflict with the DLC's writing and clunky portions of gameplay, being unable to pull it out of its troubled muck. Although he speaks, Sam rarely has anything worthwhile to say, his endearing use of Russian every now and then only reminding of how well he complimented the crew on the Aurora as the foreigner that's willing to stick his neck out for the Slavic brethren he had to survive alongside for so long. None of that charm translates to his own story that's confused in whether it wants to paint him as a mercenary or make him care about the consequences of the grand decision forced upon him, only to then reward the player with some of the blandest ending screens I've ever encountered.
Any freaks around? Guess you put too much trust in your people's ability to stop me!
So, now that I've touched upon what I liked and disliked about both DLCs, is the Metro Exodus Season Pass worth it? I wouldn't bother with it if you haven't beaten the main game first. Grab Metro Exodus, revel in its 40 plus hours of content, and should you want more, only then look towards the Season Pass. If you're buying it for about €8, it does have cool moments that justify the spending. At full price, however, it's tough to recommend as it struggles to add enough to the main experience. Neither of its two DLCs are truly vital additions, which is a rather sad thing to say about the final two stories tied to a game that was one of the most memorable experiences of 2019 and indeed the decade.
Come on! What a stench!
Are you talking to me?